Saladin, the full story of a mighty commander and conqueror. Saladin was a ruler who left a profound mark on history, not only because he was known for his wisdom, courage, and exceptional skills in politics and warfare, but especially because he left an unmistakable legacy in the history of the Middle East. By looking at his life, we open a window into the history of Eastern culture, and we also revisit the time of the Crusades, when a man emerged as the leader of the Muslim world, whose name still resonates today as a symbol of strength, justice, and culture. This is also why he was originally intended to be the central hero of Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven, in which he ultimately made an impact, even as a supporting character. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy the story of Saladin, one of the most significant rulers of the Middle Ages. Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub, commonly known as Saladin, was born in 1137 or 1138 in Tikrit, a town located on the Tigris River, about 140 kilometers northwest of Baghdad, in what is now Iraq. His family was of Kurdish origin, and his father Najmuddin and uncle Shirkuh were elite military leaders under the powerful ruler Nur ad-Din, who governed northern Syria. Not much is known about his youth, but it is known that he grew up in Damascus, where he joined the army and gradually climbed the military ranks. At the age of 18, he was appointed deputy to his uncle Shirkuh, who served as the military governor of Damascus. In 1169, Shirkuh died, and Saladin was chosen as his successor to command Nur ad-Din's forces in Egypt. Through his struggle against the crumbling Fatimid Caliphate for control over Egypt, Saladin became one of the Egyptian viziers. In 1171, he became governor of Egypt, began to undermine the power and influence of Shia Islam, and reinstated Sunni rule. He eventually gained de facto control over all of Egypt, although he still formally answered to Nur ad-Din. In this role, he revitalized Egypt's economy and reorganized its entire army. When Nur ad-Din died in 1174, Saladin sought to take control over the lands previously ruled by the Turkish leader and desired to confront the four Crusader states that had emerged after the First Crusade. In the following years, Saladin led raids against the Crusaders in Palestine, suppressed rebellions in Egypt, and successfully conquered Yemen, allowing him to secure control over the Red Sea region. Once Saladin was declared Sultan of Egypt, he returned to Syria and managed to capture Damascus, Aleppo, and Mosul, which were under the control of other Muslim rulers. In addition to his military campaigns, Saladin engaged in diplomacy to achieve his goals. He married Ismat, the widow of Nur ad-Din and daughter of the late Damascene ruler Unur, thereby securing an alliance between two ruling dynasties and gaining legitimacy as a ruler. He also proclaimed himself leader of the jihad, the effort to spread Islam, and thus gained broad support among Muslims. His ultimate goal was to unite the Muslim lands of Syria, northern Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Egypt under his rule, which he achieved by 1186 through a combination of diplomacy and military strength. Saladin's reputation as a generous and noble leader steadily grew. He ruled with a firm hand without hypocrisy, debauchery, or cruelty. He was deeply committed to jihad and more persistent and zealous in it than in anything else. For this reason, a key part of his policy was to promote the growth and expansion of Muslim religious institutions. He courted Islamic scholars and preachers, commissioning them to write educational works, especially on jihad, and founded schools and mosques for them. Saladin sought to awaken in his realm the same zeal and enthusiasm that had enabled the first generations of Muslims to conquer half the known world 5 centuries earlier. Little is known about Saladin's wives or concubines, except for his wife Ismat, with whom he had no children. The historian and scholar Imad al-Din al-Isfahani compiled a list of Saladin's sons, along with their birth dates, based on information provided by Saladin himself at the end of his reign. The number reached 15. Other sources mention that Saladin left behind 17 sons and 1 daughter, and it is possible he had other children who died before him. Among the most prominent of his descendants were Al-Afdal, Emir of Damascus; Al-Aziz, Sultan of Egypt; Al-Zahir, Emir of Aleppo. After capturing Damascus, Saladin turned to uniting the Muslim world, or at least forming a coalition of allies of the same faith. He soon realized that, given the many independent states, city rulers, and religious differences between Sunni and Shia Muslims, this would be no easy task. His strategy was to combine military campaigns with diplomacy, guided by the belief that only he could lead a holy war against the Crusaders and their kingdoms, such as the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Furthermore, he felt no remorse about fighting fellow Muslim rulers if he deemed them enemies. For instance, in 1175, he defeated the army of his rival from Aleppo. Saladin solidified his supremacy among Muslim leaders when the Caliph of Baghdad, the head of Sunni Islam, formally recognized him as governor of Egypt, Syria, and Yemen. At this moment, Saladin adopted the name Sultan Salah al-Din, which means righteousness of the faith. However, Aleppo remained independent, ruled by Nur ad-Din's son, and continued to irritate Saladin. During this time, Saladin survived 2 murder attempts by the powerful Shia sect known as the Assassins. In retaliation, he attacked the assassin stronghold of Masyaf in Syria and plundered the surrounding area. Afterward, he returned to Cairo, where he oversaw the development of the city, built universities, and ordered administration reforms. In November 1177, he launched a raid into Palestine, responding to a recent Crusader incursion into the Damascus region, and concluded that there was no longer any point in negotiating peace with them. The Christians had sent a large part of their army to lay siege to the fortress of Harim north of Aleppo, and Saladin took advantage of the situation by marching into Ascalon. His army then raided the countryside, plundering the towns of Ramla and Lod and advancing as far as the gates of Jerusalem. When King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem learned of Saladin's plans, he marched to Ascalon with his Templar knights and entered the city without being attacked. Saladin hesitated to engage them due to the presence of highly experienced Templar generals. He therefore left part of his army to besiege Gaza, stationed smaller forces at Ascalon, and with the rest marched north, believing Baldwin would not pursue him. But on November 25, 1177, Baldwin and his army surprised Saladin near Ramla. There, the Crusader army led by Baldwin attacked in the Battle of Montgazard. Before the Muslim forces could even form up, the Templars gained the upper hand. Although Saladin tried to rally his men into formation, it was no use. Seeing that his bodyguard was being slain and that defeat was inevitable, Saladin mounted a swift camel with a small remnant of his troops and retreated back to Egypt. It's said that Saladin returned to Cairo on December 8th with only 1/10 of his army, and Muslim historians considered the defeat so severe that it was not avenged until a decade later in the battles of Cresson, Hattin, and the siege of Jerusalem. Following Montgazard, mutual respect developed between Saladin and the King of Jerusalem, lasting until Baldwin's death in 1885, when the throne passed to his sister Sibylla, who crowned her husband Guy of Lusignan as king. Saladin was not discouraged by his defeat at Baldwin's hands. He reasserted his position and strengthened his resolve to rid the Middle East of Westerners in 1179 at the Battle of Marj Ayun, where Saladin's main force attacked a surprised Crusader army. The army of Jerusalem, unprepared for battle, suffered a devastating defeat, and the king narrowly escaped capture. Due to his illness, Baldwin was unable to flee on horseback, but a knight from his personal guard lifted him up and fought his way through Saladin's troops, carrying Baldwin to safety. In May 1183, Saladin captured Mosul and built an Egyptian naval fleet, further solidifying his image as a defender of Islam against rival religions, especially Christianity. Saladin then turned his attention from Mosul to Aleppo, which he successfully took, and he signed a treaty with the Byzantine Empire to stand together against their common enemy, the Seljuks. This allowed Saladin to move freely through enemy Crusader states, knowing his own lands were secure. At the same time, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was weakened by succession disputes and questions of rightful rule, creating the perfect opportunity for Saladin to strike at his greatest enemies. Tensions with the Crusaders were rising, particularly because of Reynold of Chatillon, who caused serious problems for Saladin by raiding Muslim trade and pilgrimage routes. Reynold twice threatened to attack the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, prompting Saladin to launch 2 unsuccessful sieges of the Crusader fortress of Kerak. The first was in 1183, after Saladin's failed campaign in Galilee. He laid siege to the castle during the wedding of Princess Isabella and Humphrey IV of Toron, and after some negotiation, agreed not to target the newlyweds' chambers with his siege weapons. However, Saladin was ultimately forced to withdraw after scouts reported that Baldwin IV was approaching. The second siege of Kerak occurred in 1184, when Saladin tried to fill the castle's defensive ditches to bring siege weapons within range. As with the first siege, Saladin and his forces had to retreat early before facing a Crusader relief force. After these failures, Saladin turned his focus back to a long-term campaign and resumed raids against the territory of Izz al-Din around Mosul. But Izz al-Din allied with a powerful governor from Azerbaijan and Jabal, requesting reinforcements, and Saladin hesitated to continue the assault. Once Mosul's defenders learned that help was on the way, they fought even harder, and when Saladin fell ill, a peace treaty was signed in March. Meanwhile, Reynold of Chatillon took revenge for the sieges of Kerak by massacring a caravan of pilgrims en route to Mecca during the winter of 1186–87. It's speculated that among the dead may have been Saladin's sister and her son. Whether or not that's true, when Saladin heard of the attack, he vowed to kill Reynold himself for breaking the truce. The massacre of pilgrims led Saladin to abandon all half measures regarding the capture of Kerak, and instead plan a direct assault on the heart of Christianity, Jerusalem, accelerating his invasion in the summer of 1887. On July 4th, Saladin faced the combined forces of Raymond III, Count of Tripoli, and King Guy of Lusignan, who had become king by marrying Sibylla, Baldwin's sister, who claimed the throne after his death. The battle became a crucial moment in the struggle between Muslim and Christian forces during the Crusades. Saladin used his knowledge of the terrain and tactical skill to encircle the Crusader army, cutting it off from supply lines and water. In the hot and arid conditions, the Crusader army became exhausted and dehydrated, making it easy for Saladin's forces to launch a devastating attack and shatter the enemy ranks. During the battle, Saladin captured Reynold of Chatillon and executed him personally as revenge for his attacks on Muslim caravans. Reynold had ignored pleas for mercy during his earlier attacks and was said to have tortured some victims before killing them. When Guy of Lusignan, who had also been captured, witnessed Reynold's execution, he feared he would be next. However, Saladin spared his life, telling him that kings do not kill kings, but Reynold had crossed every boundary, and Saladin acted accordingly. The Crusader defeat at the Battle of Hattin had profound consequences, as it opened the way for Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem and sparked a crisis across medieval Europe. Saladin hoped to capture Jerusalem without bloodshed and offered the defenders generous terms and reasonable demands in exchange for surrender. However, the city's defenders refused and vowed to fight to the death, rather than allow the city to fall into Muslim hands. Thus, the siege began. Saladin's forces focused primarily on the Damascus Gate and Tower of David, and his archers relentlessly bombarded the fortifications with volleys of arrows. Siege engines were positioned toward the city walls, and Saladin's troops tried to break through. The walls were gradually being destroyed by siege machines, catapults, trebuchets, and crossbows, and part of the fortifications was even undermined and blown up. The Crusaders were unable to push the Muslims back beyond the walls, but the Muslims, in turn, were also unable to breach the city. Saladin's army outnumbered the Jerusalem defenders, and before long, only a small handful of able-bodied men remained to guard the ramparts. The commander of Jerusalem's defenses, Balian of Ibelin, then rode out of the city to meet with Saladin and propose surrender, a suggestion Saladin initially rejected. Saladin responded that he would accept the terms of capitulation, but they would not apply to the French inhabitants of Jerusalem. In response, Balian threatened to execute all Muslim hostages in the city, numbering up to 5,000, and to destroy the Islamic holy sites, including the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Following these threats, Saladin consulted with his council and eventually agreed to the terms. A remarkably low ransom was set for every French person in the city, man, woman, or child. Against the advice of his treasurers, Saladin even allowed many families who couldn't afford the ransom to leave freely. Nevertheless, many people still ended up enslaved. After taking Jerusalem, Saladin invited the Jews to return and settle in the city, and the call was particularly answered by the large Jewish community of Ascalon. Following the Battle of Hattin and the fall of Jerusalem, the Third Crusade began. It was funded by the so-called Saladin tithe, a special tax levied in England and to some extent France, amounting to 10% of income and movable property. In 1291, King Richard the Lionheart of England and King Philip II of France arrived at the town of Acre, which was under siege by Guy of Lusignan, and they captured it together. After the victory, Richard ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners of war, a decision whose motives remain unclear. Some believe it was retaliation for Christians killed by Muslims. Others claim Richard acted because he planned to march on Ascalon and considered it dangerous to leave so many captives behind. On September 7th, 1191, the Battle of Arsuf took place, where Saladin's army clashed with King Richard's forces. Saladin's army suffered heavy losses and was forced to retreat south, where he dismantled the fortifications of Ascalon to prevent this strategically important city, located at the crossroads of Egypt and Palestine, from falling into Crusader hands. In October 1191, King Richard began rebuilding inland fortresses on the plain behind the port city of Jaffa in preparation for a march on Jerusalem. During this period, Richard and Saladin exchanged envoys and negotiated a possible truce. Richard even proposed a marriage between his sister Joanna and Saladin's brother, offering Jerusalem as a wedding gift. However, Saladin rejected the proposal, especially since Richard insisted that his brother be baptized and convert to Christianity. After the failed marriage proposal and several other diplomatic suggestions, Richard occupied the village of Beit Nuba, just 12 kilometers from Jerusalem. However, his army eventually withdrew without attacking the holy city, and instead marched south to Ascalon, where they built new fortifications. In July 1192, Saladin attempted to capture the coastal city of Jaffa, and had King Richard not arrived days later, he might have succeeded. Instead, Saladin was forced to confront Richard in battle outside the city, where the English king defeated him. The Battle of Jaffa was the final military engagement of the Third Crusade. After recapturing the city and rebuilding its defenses, Richard resumed peace negotiations with Saladin. Eventually, Richard agreed to dismantle the fortifications of Ascalon, and Saladin recognized Crusader control of the Palestinian coast from Tyre to Jaffa. Christians were granted safe passage to Jerusalem as unarmed pilgrims, and Saladin's kingdom remained at peace with the Crusader states for the next 3 years. Not long after Richard's return to England, Saladin died. Though the exact cause of death is uncertain, it is believed he may have succumbed to typhoid fever. At the time of his death, Saladin owned only 1 gold coin and 40 silver coins, having given away his entire fortune to the poor and leaving nothing to pay for his own funeral. He was buried in a mausoleum in the garden of the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, Syria. 7 centuries later, Saladin was given a new marble sarcophagus, donated by German Emperor Wilhelm II. The original sarcophagus was not replaced, and today, both are still present in the mausoleum, which is open to visitors. The marble sarcophagus stands beside the original wooden one, which holds Saladin's remains. Saladin became a prominent figure in Islamic, Arab, Turkish, and Kurdish culture, and he is widely regarded as the most famous Kurd in history. And that brings the life of this great Muslim ruler to a close. What do you think about his story and his legacy? Would you like to hear more stories about historical figures we mostly know from movies or TV series? Let us know in the comments.